Continuing on with my series on how to make a military rifle stock, the stock blank has the barrel channel cut, and now I'm going to inlet for the action. I'll be using the plunge router for most of the waste removal, and just like with the barrel channel, I need a stable base for the router. Unlike that, however, I'm going to be removing material across the whole width of the stock, so I'll really have to rely on these side supports that I'm going to be adding in a bit. To give an idea, I'll take the stock I'm duplicating and hold a piece of wood against the top of it. You can see how the stock tapers away from the wood and down into the wrist. If I didn't have a solid base for the router, I'd be in no man's land essentially. To add the side supports, just like for the barrel channel, I'll set up two boards upside down on a flat surface and put the stock in between them. I'll add these spacer blocks as well. You'll see why in a little bit. And then I'll clamp it all together and transfer the whole thing to the vise. Now not only do I have a solid, flat surface for the router, these spacer blocks add a gap between the stock blank and the boards and allow me not only to route right up to the edge without going into my boards, they also allow me to easily test fit the action, something I'll be doing a lot in this video. The Krag magazine sticks out the side of the receiver beyond the 2-inch thick stock blank that I have here, so once I begin inletting, I'll be able to test fit the action without disassembling the setup. I have the action aligned where I want it to go. I'm going to mark the areas where it's touching the wood, right here at the right front of the magazine, and the wall that needs to be formed here is straight up and down. It's also touching at the right rear, and it's vertical, meaning that I can plunge straight down with the router. I can use a square to both verify and draw lines across the stock. I can also get low and verify that those two spots are the only areas where it's touching, and those are where I'll make my first cuts. The router bit I'll be using most is this spiral bit, which cuts really nicely. I'll set it up a bit further out than I typically would, so later on I can plunge down deeper. And I'll remove the fence, it's not needed for now. Now I'll remove the two areas that I marked earlier. I only went about halfway deep. I'll go to full depth later. Once I get the action lower, I can get more exact measurements. I also didn't go all the way to the lines, which is why the action isn't dropping in. I can get more precise with the chisel. I'll start here. Now with the front of the magazine body butting up against where I just cut, I can draw a line on the back. I also want to mark how far to cut across the width of the stock. These are the areas I just marked. You can see that this goes just over halfway across the stock. I got pretty close to the line and it's fitting down in there. A little tight though. Though it's not centered, I have to relieve this corner here. The router bit leaves a rounded edge, so any inside corner like this needs to be manually shaped with the chisel. Onto the next spot that's touching, the front left side of the magazine body. I'll use the router here. Followed by a chisel to bring it to the line. Then I can test fit again. A little lower, but it's still a very tight fit. As I get the action lower, I may need to revisit areas that I've already touched. This corner, for example, I need to better match the angles. While the action isn't as tight of a fit now, looking at the rear tang, I can see that it's not centered. It needs to move to the left or back from this angle. It's hitting where I just carved, so I'll go ahead and chisel that back. Looking from above, it's touching there. And moving back, looking through the hole for the sear, I can tell that the action is centered. I'll take a break now and show the progress. Prior to starting, the action was sitting on top of the stock pretty much. After what I've done so far, I am able to lower it this much, but as you can see, there's still a bit more to go. And that is the gist of the inletting process. Look to see what is preventing the action from being lowered into the stock, remove those areas, and then look again. It takes a lot of repeating and a lot of test fitting, but hopefully this will result in a nice snug fit. And that's what I'll do. This time it's the right rear of the magazine body, along with some removal across the whole area since I'm nowhere close to full depth. Finally, the rear tang of the receiver is touching the wrist of the stock. I can trace around it. For cutting, I'm going to route a narrow slot down the whole length because I know the trigger goes here. I freehanded the slot without adding the fence by holding my fingers on the base plate on either side and running them along the sideboards. Next up is this step down on the side of the magazine body. It's tapered, deeper at the back than at the front. It's where the spring and the hinge for the magazine door are contained. I'll only cut the rear of it deeper. As the action goes lower, I'll remove some areas that I know will need to be removed later on, such as the edges of the rear tang. I'll just be careful not to go too far. I'm going to do two areas next. The front left of the receiver, across to the right since that area is flat, and I'll bring the tang a step deeper. I'm now going to bring the right side of the magazine near to full depth. This opening on the side of the receiver is just slightly above the barrel center line. So I'll measure from there at the front, and then again at the back, setting the router for these depths. This will bring these areas to just above full depth, close enough to fine tune later on with the chisel. only roughly connected the two areas. I'll revisit that later. I'll repeat the same process with the majority of the magazine body, bringing the front and the back to just above full depth with the router, and then roughly cutting the taper that connects the two with the chisel. Looks like I need to remove more material from this area, where the cylindrical receiver transitions down to the rear tang. Now's a good time to step back and take a look at the overall progress again. Last time I showed this angle, the tang was about 1/4 inch above the wrist. This is how much progress I've made since then. There's another inletting tip that I've avoided mentioning, but I've been using a bit here and there, and that is to look at the existing stock. I avoided mentioning it to show it's possible to inlet without a stock, and it's important to inlet for the action specifically, but if you have a stock, use it. And that's what I did here specifically. The front of the magazine cutout is rounded. If I didn't have this stock, I probably would have cut it at a 90-degree angle. I also looked at the stock to see how it's inlet for the trigger, since it and the sear need room to move around. The cutout for the tang tapers down to a small step above the rear of the magazine. What I'm going to do next is to mark and cut the slot for the trigger. I'll use the router fence this time. Aligning it with the center line. I couldn't plunge the router enough to cut the slot for the trigger all the way through. I'll switch to a drill bit to drill out either end. While I have the drill bit and the router, I want to drill for the front action screw since it's 90 degrees to the bore axis. The rear screw is at a slight angle, so I can't drill down with the router. Because it's difficult to match the angle of the rear screw exactly, I'll put that off until I have the action fully inlet. Hopefully the hole is located in the right spot. Only one way to find out. And that's a nice tight fit. Before I progress to the next stage of the inletting process, I want to cut the taper down to the magazine in the tang area that I mentioned when I was looking at the original stock. I'm just freehanding it now. I can come back later and remove more material if I find it interfering with the trigger. I just want to get it close. Here's the comparison. Like I said, I can come back later if the trigger interferes. It's becoming harder to tell just what is preventing the action from being lowered further. And that's why I have this lipstick. I'm told this is an old tube. I'm going to spread it around the underside of the action. The idea is that when I put the action in the stock, any spots where the wood is touching the metal will transfer the lipstick, essentially marking those locations as the high spots that need to be removed to lower the action further. The bright color will also stand out on camera as well. Now let's see how it works. I'll give the action a few taps to make sure it's fully seated. You can see the high spots clearly marked in pink. Now to remove them. I see a small amount of transfer on the bottom of the tang near the screw hole. I want to make sure that it's fully touching. If it is touching, it needs to be relieved since the action still needs to go lower. Like I said earlier, the side opening is just above the center line. It looks like it needs to go down a little less than 1/8 of an inch. Removing the action, I can validate that it's touching there. I'll get out the router to deepen the tang slightly. I'm setting the depth stop for 1/8, minus the thickness of this rule. Since the whole tang will be below the top of the wrist now, I'll relieve some of the extra wood. This will make it easier to inlet, since I essentially need to take all of this work that I've done in this area and move it down by the amount of material that I removed from the tang. The action is also touching here in the magazine area, but I can't get the chisel low enough to cut it out properly. It's time to remove these sideboards. With the sideboards removed, I can get a much better look at how much lower the action needs to go. I'll connect the two ends of the magazine area with a straight edge and remove the waste with the chisel, working from the side. There's still a gap at the bottom, but it matches up close with how it should look. Back to the tang area. I ran out of the lipstick, so I got a new one. Since it's a different color, I wiped it all off the action and I'll reapply. This fresh stick is easier to use. I'm going to put it over all of the areas that could touch the stock. I'll also use it up on the underside of the barrel as well. Though I cut and shaped the barrel channel in the previous video, I wasn't able to test fit the action fully until now. I'll put the action back into the stock. And you can see there's a large area where it's touching here, as well as the tang. I'll use the gouge on the barrel channel, but I want to always smooth it out with sandpaper as well, since it is a large area that needs to be taken down. Looking at the side view, I think I'm at the depth that I want. The side cutout on the receiver is just over the top of the stock. There are some small gaps where I cut a little bit too deep, particularly at the corner on the left, but nothing too major. From here on out, I just need to fine-tune the fit. Moving down to the barrel, it's high at the front, so something is preventing it from sitting where it should be. I'll press down, flexing the barrel. I'm looking for a spot where I can't. There it is. I'm expecting to see lipstick transfer in this area. And there that is. I'm only going to use the sandpaper to bring it down since I'm very close and it's touching over a large area. I don't feel any flex in the barrel at all, and the front is centered on the bore axis. Now is the point where I need to switch mindsets. I have been working to remove areas where the lipstick transfers, but with the action at full depth, those transferred areas become spots where the action is bed, where the metal is touching the wood. There's a large spot on the barrel channel. Other important areas are the receiver screws. The front one isn't touching. From the side view earlier it was low. The rear screw is touching. Ideally the whole area that's inlet should be showing up pink, and the whole inletting would be a perfect fit to the action, but that's just not possible, at least not for me. There are important areas that should be fully bed, and for those I'm going to use epoxy. They are the area around the two action screws, the rear of the tang for recoil, as well as the sides, the front of the receiver, and the chamber area of the barrel. I'm going to be applying the epoxy between the wood and the metal, so I'll start by removing the lipstick from the action. This is the epoxy I'll be using, Acroglass Gel by Brownells. I'll start by applying the release agent to those areas of the action. Acroglass comes in two varieties. The regular is very thin, almost watery. This gel is thick and won't spread out as much, allowing it to be built up thicker. That's why I'm going to be using it for this. I'll scoop out roughly equal portions of each. Mix it up. Add a few drops of black dye. And mix it again. I'm going to put the front action screw into the stock, holding it up with tape. I don't want the screw pushing epoxy up into the action. Now I'll apply it to the areas of the stock that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to be careful applying it around the screws. I don't have the stock drilled for the rear screw hole. Again, I don't want the epoxy flowing up into the screw hole in the action. Now I'll carefully drop the action into the stock. I'll tighten the action screw, but the compression of the epoxy will require a lot of pressure. I'll add clamps at the front. and the rear of the action. After the action is clamped, there is some epoxy squeezing out, particularly up and over the rear tang. I want to remove it before it cures and prevents the action from being lifted out of the stock. Then I'll reapply the clamp before leaving the epoxy to cure overnight. It's been over 12 hours and the leftover epoxy is fully hardened. Now to remove the clamps and the screw. I'm always nervous that I won't be able to remove the action. But out it comes. The underside looks good. The epoxy looks good too. I'm not sure why it's not solid black. Maybe I didn't mix the dye in as well as I thought. It is smooth to the touch, however. Now to peel off this blue film, which is the dried release agent. I do have a bit of cleanup work to do, particularly where the epoxy flowed into any unsupported areas. There is a rough spot on the tang here, but that's where the cutout for the bolt handle will be. I'll save that for when I shape the wrist. The rest of the epoxy is nice and smooth. Test fitting. The action is a very snug fit now, but before I say I'm finished inletting, I need to tackle 2 more areas. Flipping the stock over. These 2 holes are for the trigger. I'll connect them and then chisel out the wood in between. I'll put the trigger in the action and test the function. Looks like it needs more room to move. I'll get out the lipstick again and coat the trigger. With the action back in, I'll move the trigger to get the lipstick to transfer. Looks like it needs more relief at the front and at the back. I can feel the trigger now has a full range of travel. There's nothing interfering with it, and the sear moves fully up and down as it should. The second and last area to inlet is this cutout on the left for the side plate. Aligning the screw holes, I'll trace around it, and then roughly chisel it out. With lipstick around the side plate, I'll screw it onto the action and then drop that in. It's touching at the back. These two vertical walls need to be moved back, and the curve needs some attention too. I'm happy with that fit. There's a gap at the bottom corner, but it's not too bad. At the front there's a larger gap between the wood and the side plate, but the original stock has a gap here too. It's consistent though. There is the magazine door on the other side, but that doesn't require inletting to fit, it just needs the stock slimmed down. And that's the next step, to shape the exterior. The inletting is a long, tedious process, but such patience is required for a nice snug fit. Of course I could have cut corners and later filled them in with epoxy, but I like to have the wood fit as tightly as possible and only use the epoxy in those areas that need additional support. That's all for this video. See you next time as I move on to shaping the exterior. Thanks for watching.